The wrought iron gate groaned in the dusk, and there on the cold stone driveway, Denise Jackson lay crumpled like someone had simply run out of strength mid-step. Richard Hale, a widowed millionaire who usually lived by calendars and conference calls, dropped to his knees and grabbed her shoulder, his breath catching when she didn't stir. Behind him, his 7-year-old twins Ben and Owen wailed so hard their voices cracked, clinging to his suit pant legs as if fear had hands. Richard didn't think he lifted Denise carefully, laid his jacket under her head in the back seat, and tore toward the nearest ER, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, just to make sure her chest still rose. At the hospital, the doctor's words landed like a verdict: dangerously low blood pressure, dehydration, and weeks of barely eating. Her body had finally shut down. Richard stood there ashamed because he couldn't even answer when she'd last had a real meal. When he called the house manager Mrs., Donnelly admitted Denise had fainted before twice, and kept working anyway. That's when the boys whispered the truth. Denise wasn't just the cleaner. She'd been baking teaching soothing nightmares, singing the lullaby their late mother used to sing while their father came home after they slept. In Denise's hospital room, she confessed she hid her sickness because people like her get fired for needing help. Richard swallowed hard and made a decision that would cost him meetings, not money. Denise would rest, her mother would get care extra help, would be hired, and he would start showing up not as a paycheck, but as a father. Richard sat in the fluorescent hush of the ER hallway, the twins pressed into his sides like they were trying to stitch themselves back to him. Every time a nurse walked by, Ben's fingers tightened around Richard's hand, and Owen's eyes stayed fixed on the frosted glass door, as if he could will Denise back to safety. Richard kept hearing the doctor's warning: weeks of barely eating, and it didn't feel like medical information. It felt like an accusation. When the house manager, Mrs. Donnelly, finally answered his call, her voice wavered. "She's been fainting," she admitted, words tumbling out like guilt. "Twice inside the house. I told her to rest, but..." She kept going. Richard's jaw locked so hard it ached. In his mind, his home flashed like a movie set: polished counters, quiet rooms, everything perfect. And beneath that perfection, a woman pushing herself until her body gave up at the gate. He looked down at his sons. "You're with Denise all day?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The boys nodded so fast it was desperate. Then the truth spilled out in broken, urgent sentences. Denise made their breakfast, tied their shoelaces, wiped tears they didn't show anyone else. She sat by their beds until their breathing slowed. She sang the same soft lullaby their mother used to sing, so familiar that Richard's throat tightened because he'd forgotten the melody. And in that moment, the real emergency wasn't just Denise's collapsed body. It was the life Richard had been missing: his children growing up in a house full of people yet starving for their father. He stared at the door again, and for the first time in years, he didn't want a deal, a contract, or control. He wanted Denise to wake up. He wanted a chance to fix what he'd neglected starting now. Richard turned his back to the hallway so the twins wouldn't see his face change, but his voice still came out sharp when he called Mrs. Donnelly. "Tell me everything," he said, low and controlled. There was a pause long enough for the hospital's distant monitor beeps to feel louder. Then her confession cracked through the line. "She hasn't been well for days," Mrs. Donnelly whispered. "She fainted in the laundry room, then again in the kitchen. I told her to see a doctor, but she said she couldn't afford it." Richard's grip tightened around his phone until his knuckles blanched. "And you let her keep working?" His words trembled with disbelief more than anger. "I thought it was exhaustion," she rushed on, voice trembling. "She does. Everything. The cleaning, the cooking, the boys. She's up before sunrise, and still moving when the house finally quiets. She never complains. She never asks." Mrs. Donnelly hesitated, then added, almost ashamed, "I even gave her my blood pressure pills. I thought it would help." Richard closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw Denise moving through his mansion like a shadow, scrubbing, stirring, soothing, holding his children's days together with hands that were shaking from hunger. He'd been so proud of a well-run home, as if calm rooms meant everyone inside them was okay. He looked down at Ben and Owen, their cheeks still wet, their small bodies vibrating with leftover fear. "You're with her all day," he said again, softer now, like he was finally admitting it. They nodded, and Richard felt something in him collapse, not from exhaustion, but from realization. Denise hadn't just been working for him. She'd been carrying what he'd dropped. The doctor stepped into the hallway with a clipboard held tight against her chest. Her expression steady, but unsoftened, like someone who'd seen this kind of collapse too many times. Richard stood so fast his knees wobbled, the twins still glued to him, their small hands gripping his sleeves. Is she going to be okay?" he asked, and he hated how helpless his voice sounded. "She's awake now," the doctor said, then paused just long enough for hope to rise, and for the next words to knock it back down. But her blood pressure was dangerously low. Severe dehydration. And she hasn't been eating properly for a long time. Her body didn't faint, it shut down to protect itself. She glanced at Richard's suit, then at the boy's swollen eyes. When was the last time she had a full meal? Richard opened his mouth and nothing came out. His silence hung there heavy and unmistakable. The doctor's tone sharpened, not cruel, just urgent. "We're running blood work for anemia and nutritional deficiencies. If she keeps pushing like this, you're looking at recurrent fainting heart rhythm problems, organ stress, something far worse than a scare at a front gate." Ben's voice broke the quiet. "She always says she's not hungry," he whispered, like it was a secret he'd been protecting. Owen sniffed hard. "She gives us the good parts." Richard's stomach twisted. He pictured Denise Jackson standing at his kitchen counter making plates for his children with careful hands, then skipping her own because there wasn't time or money or permission in her mind to be human. He swallowed, forcing his voice to work. "Can I see her?" The doctor nodded once, briefly. "Keep it calm." Richard turned to his sons and crouched eye-level hands on their shoulders. "Stay right here," he said, steadying them and himself. "I'm going to talk to Denise, and I'm not leaving her to carry this alone anymore." Denise Jackson looked impossibly small on the narrow hospital bed, an IV taped to her arm. Her skin still drained of color, like the life had been rinsed out of her. Her eyes were open, but tired, heavy, guarded, like she was bracing for the next blow. When Richard stepped in, she tried to push herself upright out of pure habit, then winced and stopped. "Don't," he said quickly, one hand raised, not touching her, just asking her to stay still. "You don't have to prove anything right now." Her throat worked before her voice did. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I'll be better tomorrow. I can come back and—" "No." The word came out firm, almost fierce. Richard felt it in his own chest, the way it echoed against years of pretending everything was fine. "You're not coming back tomorrow. You're resting, and I need you to tell me the truth." Denise's gaze dropped to the sheet fingers twisting the fabric like it could hide her shame. "I didn't want to bother you," she said, barely audible. "People get sent away for less. If I complain, I lose the job. And I can't." She inhaled, shallow and shaky. "My mom is sick. She needs medication every day. I'm all she has." Richard's eyes stung. He thought of his sons outside that door, terrified of losing one more person, and of Denise carrying that fear while carrying her own. "You really thought I'd fire you for being sick?" he asked, softer now. Denise gave the smallest shrug, the saddest kind of answer. "Most people do." Richard nodded once, swallowing hard. "Then this ends here," he said. "The silence, the fear, the work until you fall. Not in my house, not anymore." Richard stayed quiet for a beat. The kind of silence that isn't empty, it's loaded. He could hear the twins in the hallway, their small voices rising and falling as they tried to be brave, and it hit him like a punch. Denise hadn't just been afraid of losing a job. She'd been afraid of leaving his boys alone with a father who wasn't really there. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, shoulders stiff, eyes locked on the IV drip, like it was counting down all the minutes he'd wasted. "I need you to listen to me," he said, steady but raw. "You're staying here tonight. You're getting fluids, you're getting tests, and you're eating real food. That's not negotiable." Denise's brows pinched. "But the house, there's laundry dinner, the boys. The house can wait." Richard cut in, then softened his voice when he saw her flinch. "My sons cannot, and neither can you." He exhaled slow, like he was letting go of something he'd been gripping for years. "Tomorrow they're with me. All day. I'll make breakfast. I'll handle the mess. I'll sit with them when the quiet gets too loud." Denise stared at him, suspicious hope flickering behind exhaustion. Richard didn't look away. "I built a life where everything runs on time," he said, his throat tightening. "Meetings, contracts, numbers. And somehow I convinced myself that was the same as taking care of them." His hand curled into a fist against his knee. "It's not." He leaned forward, voice breaking just once. "I've been a ghost in my own home, Denise. And I'm done hiding in work while my kids grow up without me." Richard stepped back into the corridor and found Ben and Owen exactly where he'd left them, sitting on the linoleum floor, shoulders hunched, fingers laced together so tightly their knuckles looked white. The moment they saw his face, they shot up like Spring's eyes, searching his for the one thing they couldn't say out loud. He crouched in front of them, suit pants creasing at the knees, and placed a hand on each small shoulder. "Denise is okay," he said slowly, choosing every word like it mattered, because it did. "She's awake. She's just exhausted. The doctors are taking care of her tonight." Ben's breath hitched. Owen's lower lip trembled, then both boys crashed into his chest at once, arms wrapping around his neck like they were afraid he might vanish if they let go. Richard held them tighter than he meant to, feeling their ribs flutter with sobs, feeling the heat of their little bodies seep through his dress shirt. For a second, his throat locked up, because he realized this wasn't only fear for Denise. It was fear of losing anyone else. Fear of being left again. "I'm here," he whispered into their hair, his voice rough. "I'm not going anywhere." On the drive home, the twins finally fell asleep in the back seat, faces streaked with dried tears, mouths parted in fragile peace. Richard drove slower than usual, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting on the console, like he needed something solid to keep him grounded. Every few seconds he checked the rearview mirror, not for traffic, but for proof that his boys were still there, still breathing, still his to protect. And in that quiet he understood something brutal and simple. A perfect house meant nothing if the people inside it were breaking. Back at the mansion, the silence felt different, too clean, too rehearsed, like the house had been holding its breath for years. Richard parked in the cavernous garage and just sat there for a moment, watching Ben and Owen sleep in the back seat, their lashes still clumped from tears. Then he opened the door and lifted them one in each arm, surprised by how light they were and by how unfamiliar the weight felt against his chest. Their heads lolled toward his shoulders, warm and trusting, and he climbed the staircase slowly, careful not to jostle them awake. He didn't take them to their separate, perfectly decorated rooms. Tonight, he laid them side by side in one bed, tucked the blanket up to their chins, brushed hair from their foreheads with a hand that trembled slightly, and stood there too long, staring like he was trying to memorize the simple miracle of them breathing. Downstairs, hunger finally caught up to him. He opened the stainless steel refrigerator and froze. Containers filled every shelf, labeled in neat handwriting. Ben Tuesday, Owen. Wednesday, dates portions, little notes. Denise had been feeding his children like someone who planned for storms. He warmed one tray and ate. Standing at the marble counter, rice beans, shredded chicken vegetables, simple, careful, nourishing. And as he swallowed another image, rose a lunch meeting where one plate cost more than Denise likely made in a week. His stomach turned not from the food, but from the truth. That night his king-sized bed felt too wide, too empty, and for the first time in years the numbers in his phone didn't matter. Only the sound of his sons asleep down the hall, and the fact that Denise had nearly collapsed, carrying the life he'd abandoned. Morning didn't arrive gently. It crashed into Richard's room with two small bodies and two urgent voices. Ben and Owen bounced on his mattress like they were afraid the promise might evaporate if they didn't say it fast enough. Dad, wake up. You said we're getting Denise today. Their hair stuck up in every direction, sneakers already on, eyes wide and hopeful, in a way that made Richard's chest ache. He sat up, blinking against the sunlight, and for once he didn't reach for his phone. No calendar, no deals, no excuses. He showered quickly, skipped the suit, and pulled on jeans and a plain white polo clothes that felt almost like a confession. Downstairs he stood in his kitchen, staring at cabinets like they were a foreign language, then forced himself to move. Bread into the toaster. Butter. Fresh orange juice squeezed with clumsy hands. He sliced bananas and melon too thick, nicked his finger, and hissed. The boys giggled, then watched him like he was doing something heroic. You can cook, Owen asked, half shocked, half impressed. Barely, Richard said, and for the first time in a long time, his laugh sounded real. And Denise is still better than me. At the hospital, Denise was waiting with a small plastic bag of prescriptions and a borrowed change of clothes. She rose slowly when she saw them still pale, still fragile, trying to look fine out of habit. The twins launched themselves at her legs, hugging her so hard she wobbled. Denise's hands shook as she stroked their hair, blinking fast like she didn't trust her own emotions. In the car ride home, the boys fell quiet. Then Ben spoke in a thin, trembling voice, like he'd been carrying it all night. Dad, we thought you'd be mad. We thought you'd fire her. Richard's stomach dropped. He kept his eyes on the road, but his grip tightened on the wheel. Why would you think that? Owen answered, words spilling out. Because it happened before, with the other lady. She was sick and crying, and you said you had company. Denise's eyes closed for a second, like the memory stung. Richard swallowed hard, shame burning hot under his skin. I was wrong, he said quietly, and I'm not doing that again. When they pulled up to the gate, Owen started crying again, soft at first. Then full-bodied, because the stone drive looked exactly like the moment before everything almost shattered. Denise tried to step out on her own pride, making her move before strength did. Her knees buckled. Richard was already there, catching her elbow, steadying her like he meant it. Easy, he said, voice low. I'm not letting you hit the ground again. Inside, the twins hovered at her sides like tiny bodyguards, their hands hovering near her waist, as if they could physically hold her upright with love alone. Richard guided everyone into the living room, and then turned to the boys kneeling so his eyes were level with theirs. Go upstairs and play for a few minutes, he said. I need to talk to Denise so she can get better. We want to stay, Ben insisted, chin up brave, but trembling. You can stay close, Richard promised, and he meant it. But this is part of caring for her. Trust me. They retreated reluctantly, leaving the door cracked close enough to hear, close enough to make sure nobody disappeared. Denise sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped so tightly her fingers whitened. Richard didn't pace. He didn't soften the truth with polite distance. He sat across from her and spoke plainly. Denise, I need the whole truth. What are you doing here every day? What are you forcing yourself to carry because you're afraid you'll be punished for needing help? Denise stared at her lap breath shallow. I didn't come here to be more than the cleaning, she admitted. But the boys were so alone. They wouldn't eat. They wouldn't bathe. They cried in their rooms. I started helping because nobody else was. Richard's face tightened pain, not anger. And you did it by yourself. She nodded once. I'd get home and still take care of my mom. I'd come back here without eating, thinking I'd grab something later. And then later never came. Richard swallowed the words rough in his throat. This house has been perfect, because you've been breaking yourself to keep it that way. He leaned forward, eyes steady. That ends today. Richard leaned back, letting Denise's words hang in the air like dust caught in sunlight. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked, Ben and Owen shifting, listening, small hearts braced for another adult to disappear. Richard rubbed his thumb across his knuckle, a nervous habit he didn't realize he still had, then met Denise's eyes. I'm going to fix this, he said, not loud, just certain. First, you're not working like this anymore. You will have breaks. You will eat. You will rest. Second, you're getting medical care and I'm paying for it. Third, your mother's appointments and medication are covered, not as charity, as responsibility. Denise's mouth opened, ready to refuse out of pride, out of fear, out of years of being told she should accept less. Richard shook his head before she could speak. And I'm hiring help. Part-time if that's what it takes. Nobody in this house is going to collapse just to keep things looking perfect. Denise's shoulders quivered, not with drama, with relief she didn't trust yet. Mr. Hale, I don't want the boys to go through another loss, she whispered. Richard's throat tightened. He glanced toward the staircase as if he could see the twins through the walls. Neither do I, he said. And the first thing I'm changing is this: I'm done being a stranger in my own home. He stood steady now. I'll be here earlier. I'll eat dinner with them. I'll explain when I travel. I'll show them day by day that I'm not going to vanish. Sometimes the people holding our world together are the ones quietly falling apart. Paying bills, doing the minimum, or staying busy doesn't equal love. Love is presence. Love is noticing. Love is making sure the people who care for your family, including you, are cared for too. If this story hit you in the heart, tell me in the comments. Have you ever realized too late that someone needed help? And what did you do next? And if you want more true-to-life stories that remind us what really matters, subscribe to the channel and stay with me because the next one might be the one you need most.